Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Business owners should visit IRS.gov, IRS.gov for help with tax actions when closing a business. IRS Tax Tip 2020-131, October 5th, 2020. Closing a business is always a difficult decision regardless of the circumstances. With this in mind, the IRS redesigned the Closing a Business page. There's a link to the Closing a Business page here of the IRS.gov website to help business owners navigate the federal tax steps when closing a business. So obviously this year there's going to be more people that are closing their business due to the circumstances. This year, closing a business is a painful thing to do, but it really is worth your while to take the time to follow through in the closing of the business, because if you don't follow through with the closing of the business, then it'll keep on haunting you. You're going to say, hey, the business is closed. I'm not dealing with that anymore. I've moved on to this other thing. But if some of the steps aren't taken to close it successfully, then they can come back and be a problem, in the future. So it's worthwhile to go through and follow through and close the business. Even if you close it in the middle of the year, then you want to make sure that you're still taking care of kind of like those year-end obligations, especially related to payroll obligations, payroll reporting, and if you have any kind of obligation for your tax returns being set up as an S corporation or an LLC in particular, then you want to make sure that you close those up properly, especially if you're in a state that charges you annual fees or annual taxes or whatever they want to call them. You want to make sure that you close that up properly, which is a more difficult step than you might think. It's actually, a lot of times it's actually easier to start the S corporation or an LLC than it is to close it. I don't think, sometimes personally, I don't think the states really like them to be closed, right? They like to keep them open because they charge a fee on them yearly. So you want to make sure to take the steps to close those up, and that'll clear things up so that you can move forward smoothly with whatever you're going to move forward with on the next step. So back to the text. Small businesses and self-employed taxpayers will find a variety of information on the page, including what forms to file, how to report revenue received in the final year of a business, how to report expenses incurred before closure. The page also details steps all business owners should take when closing, file a final tax return and related forms. The type of return to file and related forms depend on the type of business. So if you're filing a final return, if you're sole proprietorship, then it's usually going to be a little bit more straightforward because you're just going to mark it. You can mark it out on the Schedule C, but the Schedule C is attached to the 1040, so it's a little bit easier. But also note that if you have employees or an EIN number, then you're going to want to look into steps in terms of closing up the employer identification number, kind of like the social security number for the business, and make sure that you're taking care of the payroll taxes. That's where that could, if you don't, that can lead to more difficulties. It's a problem area. So you want to make sure that you close up the payroll as smoothly as possible. And if you're an S corporation or an LLC, then you could file the final tax return. You'll see a little box to file the final tax return. And a lot of times you're going to think, well, I checked off the little box and I filed the final tax return. When I filed it, I should be done and everything is done. But note that if you haven't paid all your taxes and going through all the steps that the state in particular wants here, that's who I'm a little bit more worried about, because they often charge a fee, which gets people into trouble if the fee builds up over multiple years. Then they won't close it even though you checked off the little box, and it'll continue to haunt you. So you want to make sure to go through the steps at this point, if at all possible, which of course includes paying off the taxes, because they typically won't close it unless you can pay off the taxes. So, and obviously that could be a problem. But it might be well worth it to look into, how to get everything settled up at this point in time, and then file the final tax return. Would be the easiest thing to do. So in any case, and obviously get advice from a tax professional in that circumstance as well. So back to the text. Take care of employees. Business owners with one or more employees must pay any final wages or compensation, make final federal tax deposits, and report employment taxes. So make sure to follow through with the employee payments as best you can. Most people, like if there's any kind of legal issue or any kind of thing, like a lot of that comes into play with employees. So you want to make sure to follow that through as much as possible. If you do not pay Like if you withhold wages from your employee and there's a cash flow problem and you don't pay the IRS the payroll taxes, then the IRS may and most likely will interpret that not just as not paying the taxes because you didn't have the cash flow. They might interpret it as taking money from the employees, because in theory, the money you didn't give them for their wages was because you're paying their payroll taxes. So you don't want to get in that situation. If you're not able to pay taxes, then try to get on an installment agreement for the federal income taxes, not the payroll taxes, especially not the employee portion of the payroll taxes. And then at year end, make sure to file, do the W-2s and file all the final, requirements, the 941s and the 940 at the end of the year, and follow through with that. It really is, I think it'll be worth your time to close it out smoothly and then move forward. So pay taxes owed. Even if the business closed now, the tax payments may be due next filing season. So if you haven't paid the taxes, you're probably closed in the middle of the year, and cash flow's down. That's why you may have closed in the first place. So you might have a tax bill that's going to be outstanding. You want to be able to pay the tax bill if you can, because they won't close the EIN number, and the state won't close the S corporation or LLC until you get the final payment, because they need the EIN number, which means that the company's still alive. Basically, it has its own number. They won't close that unless they get the final payment. And they can't do that. They can't close it because they're going to get a payment with that number in it later. That's their excuse for not closing it. And then the state, again, may charge you a fee each year that could build up and become burdensome at some point. So if you can pay pay off the taxes in some way, shape, or form, you might even look into loan possibilities. Talk to your accountant about that, so that you can close everything up properly as soon as possible. It might save time and effort in the future. So report payments to contract workers. Businesses that pay contractors at least $600 for services including parts and materials during the calendar year in which they go out of business must report those payments. So just like you got to report the W-2 to your employees, really the IRS isn't as concerned with you giving the W-2 to the employee. They're concerned with you giving the W-2 to them, of course, because they want to know. They want to know that this person earned money, so they can get a piece of that. So that on the 1099, it's the same thing. So if you had contractors that aren't corporations and you paid them over $600, typically sole proprietor contractors, you're supposed to report the 1099s. And again, the IRS wants to see those so that they can check the social security numbers for these people and see if they are properly reporting on, like a Schedule C, their income. So that's another thing the IRS is going to basically hold you to, even though you might be closing in the middle of the year, and you typically do that 1099 reporting at the end of the year. You want to basically follow through with those kind of things as much as possible. The payroll is the big one. If you have payroll, make sure to follow through that. 1099s too is, of course, a year-end obligation that you want to be picking up as well. So cancel the EIN, which is the employer identification number, and close IRS business account. So business owners should notify the IRS so they can close the IRS business account. So the EIN number is basically, even if you're a sole proprietorship, even if you don't have employees, you may have picked up an EIN number so you didn't have to use your social security number if you needed to give someone like your number for taxes so they can 1099 you or something like that. So you'd like to close out the EIN number. In order to do that, they typically want to give you they're going to need basically your final payments again before you can basically close out the EIN number. So you'd like to get that done and close that out. If you have a state number, which is different than the EIN number, because the IRS knows you by their number, and then the state might know you by their number, which might be a different number, most likely will be, then you got to close out that number. And again, the state is a little more concerning to me oftentimes, because they can actually be a little bit more sticky to close things up, especially if you're an S corporation or an LLC. So you want to make sure to follow through with that. And obviously, the state and the Fed don't always talk to each other, but in terms of if you're not completely closed up on the Fed side, then the state might not get closed up properly as well. So anyways, Keep business records. How long a business needs to keep records depends on what records in each document. So the IRS has, the statute of limitations. They have at least 3 years to basically, they can come back and audit you for almost any reason. But I would keep the records for at least 5 to 7 years. And employee records, you probably want to keep for life, because those things, those are where the stickiest problems can happen, with the most kind of litigation types of problems and whatnot can happen with payroll. So I would just hold on to those, put them in a safe spot, and save those items. But that's just my opinion. So the page also provides helpful information for business owners declaring bankruptcy, selling their business, and terminating retirement plans.